Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the National Zoning Atlas's launch of the Virginia Zoning Atlas. We're really excited to be here today. Thank you so much for joining us. I should start by thanking the many partners who have helped to bring not only the Atlas itself, but also the report that we're about to discuss today to fruition. First and foremost, HousingForward Virginia. We have two of their representatives who will be speaking today on this webinar, but they have been with this project from the very beginning. They started the effort of analyzing zoning codes out in the Hampton Roads area and partnered with us on the completion of the project and the report. So again, first and foremost, thanks to HousingForward Virginia. If you don't know about that organization, find them online. We'd also like to thank the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, one of our early partners for the project generally, but they also pitched in analyzing some of the zoning codes in and around the DC metro area. And they've published a paper on that, so I recommend that. But again, thanks to the Mercatus Center for getting us going project-wide and also sustaining the work in Virginia. We'd also like to thank Capital One as well as Virginia Housing. Both of them have been leaders in thinking about the housing problem and in funding this work and contributing to what HousingForward Virginia and other organizations are doing in Virginia. They're continuing to take the lead on some of the important topics that we'll talk about today, including at a very basic level, understanding the scope of the problem. So just by way of quick introduction, I'm Sarah Bronin, the founder and director of the National Zoning Atlas. And it's my pleasure to introduce Eric Mai, the executive director for strategy and sustainability of HousingForward. And he in turn will introduce another special guest. So Eric, go ahead.
Thank you, Sarah. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with us, HousingForward Virginia is a nonpartisan nonprofit focused on education, research, and data on affordable housing. We work across the Commonwealth of Virginia to equip community leaders with the information and ideas to solve their housing challenges. As Sarah mentioned, in 2023, we made the decision to invest our time and capacity in launching the Virginia Zoning Atlas with the National Zoning Atlas because we saw a major knowledge gap, not just in Virginia, but across the country. Lack of understanding of zoning contributes to our continued housing supply and affordability challenges. And we certainly recognize that zoning and land use are not the only problem that we face, but it is one piece of the puzzle in solving our housing crisis. And it's one that we as residents have direct influence over. And I'm sure that not all of us are urban planners or real estate developers or land use attorneys. And so we really believe in the National Zoning Atlas project and its goals. And so thanks to generous support from both Capital One and Virginia Housing, the Virginia Zoning Atlas is now complete. And this knowledge and information is available for everyone to see. And so without their contributions, everything that you see today could not have happened. And so with that, I'd love to turn it over to Dane Moist of Capital One.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric, and good morning, everyone. As Sarah and Eric mentioned, my name is Dane Moyes, and I am a market lead on Capital One's Community Impact and Investment team. We serve as the bridge between Capital One and community partners to understand the landscape and bring Capital One's core assets, our people, technology, and strategic support to the table to help solve shared challenges. Having been founded in Richmond and headquartered in McLean, Capital One is proud to have supported HousingForward Virginia and the Zoning Atlas's expansion and completion of the Virginia Zoning Atlas, a valuable tool that will inform a range of organizations and community stakeholders to help shape the state's land use policy. We're very excited to see how the Zoning Atlas will help us and others continue our work in the preservation and creation of affordable housing around the state. And thank you so much to the teams at HousingForward Virginia, the National Zoning Atlas, the Mercatus Center, and Virginia Housing on this partnership. With that, I'll turn it back to the team.
Thanks so much, Dane, and thanks, Eric, for your continued support. We'll move on now to the big topic of the day, which is the analysis that we've just released on statewide zoning conditions in Virginia. As part of that report release, we are doing this webinar to kind of summarize how things shook out in terms of the data. And so in terms of the contents of the presentation today, we're going to start with just at a very big picture, why the National Zoning Atlas. Eric talked about why Virginia needed to get involved and why they took the lead in making it happen. But stepping back, why are we doing this on a national scale? I'll explain a bit about that. Then we'll turn to how it's made. So how do we pull this together? What information do we use? How does it get up on the map? We'll talk about how to use the NZA. I encourage you, by the way, to go to zoningatlas.org/atlas so you can play along while we are in that section. We will then get to the meat of the presentation, how Virginia zones. In that section, we'll talk about not only our statewide findings, but also our regional findings and our findings with regard to principal cities as well. And then finally, we'll give some pointers about how Virginia and those on this call can continue to utilize the National Zoning Atlas as you digest the findings and then consider paths forward. So just moving on to why the National Zoning Atlas, we really started to I guess, achieve three different goals. One is at a very basic level to digitize information about zoning and make it available for people. To demystify what's in zoning codes, which can often number hundreds of pages long, by extracting information, and Ashley will describe this, extracting information from these lengthy texts and maps to enable us to be able to compare jurisdictions to each other. I like our third part of our mission best, I think, the democratization aspect of the National Zoning Atlas. This originally started through work in Connecticut so that we could empower advocates there to understand the tapestry of zoning in Connecticut. And we have used that in Connecticut. Advocates have used it in Connecticut to make some positive changes at the state and local level. We've seen that play out again and again throughout the country. And the only way that advocates can make those changes is by having the most compelling case, the most data-driven case, and by using our information to help change the map. Speaking of the map, here's an image at a very high level of the Zoning Atlas and our coverage to date. We've been working since 2020, starting again in Connecticut, and slowly we've formed partnerships and received philanthropic funding to keep working across the country. As Ashley and Patrick will explain, we do this in a very painstaking way and digest information about zoning where it exists. And we also assess where zoning exists at all. As you'll hear when we discuss the Virginia findings, there are some places in Virginia that don't exercise zoning. On this map, you can see those places in gray. Places that we've analyzed zoning are in purple, and we'll get down into the details as the presentation continues. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our two lead presenters today. Patrick De Hoyos, our geospatial analyst, who has been with us for a couple of years, as has Ashley, who analyzes text. Together, they and many other team members that I'd like to recognize, some of which are on this call, some of which contributed to the report, but contributing to the Virginia Zoning Atlas was a full team effort here on the National Zoning Atlas side. So a shout out to all those who aren't presenting today, but Patrick and Ashley will represent you very well. As they present, I encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A box, which is somewhere at the bottom of your screen. I'll be monitoring the Q&A and I'll be managing it when the time comes. But with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Ashley, who's going to tell everyone how this colossal effort, how we undertake it. Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Ashley, and I am a zoning analyst at the NZA. So I've worked on zoning across a number of states, including Arizona, North Carolina, and Virginia, just to name a few. So analysis begins by identifying jurisdictions. These are counties, cities, and towns with zoning authority. Here, as you can see, we have 7 of the 321 jurisdictions found across Virginia that have the right to exercise zoning. So each jurisdiction with zoning is made up of zoning districts, and each district usually has different regulations. Here's a screenshot of several zoning districts from Vienna as they appear in the NZA editor. You can see the district names on the left of the screenshot, along with the type of district ranging from primarily residential to non-residential. There are also a mix of base districts, which are the base classifications on the map, and overlay districts, which are districts that overlay one or more base districts to provide additional regulations in line with the objective of the overlay. Once we have identified that a jurisdiction is zoned, we collect two main components of a complete zoning code: the zoning text and the zoning map. Both are necessary for the process. While the ordinance text contains a lot of critical information, we also need to know how much land is allocated to each district and how they are distributed throughout the jurisdiction. And this is usually where the map comes into play. Here you can see images of the text and the map we used for our analysis in Vienna in Fairfax County. Team members then complete 2 work streams per jurisdiction: the text analysis and geospatial analysis. The text analyst first obtains a zoning text, then identifies a list of districts and logs each data point using NZA's standardized methodology. The geospatial analyst starts by obtaining a zoning map, locates the zoning districts, and depending on the available format, either digitizes a static or PDF map or standardizes existing geospatial data. So the 2 work streams work hand in hand to create the zoning districts for each jurisdiction.
Thank you, Ashley, and hello, everybody. I'm Patrick De Hoyos, and I'm a geospatial analyst with the NZA. I'm currently analyzing geospatial zoning data for New York State, but I've worked on a variety of states in the past, including Arizona, Utah, Georgia, North Carolina, Massachusetts, Maine, and of course, Virginia. We'd like to highlight some of the unique aspects about the places we analyze. Coastal Virginia includes a cross-jurisdictional zoning district called the Chesapeake Bay Protection Area to protect and improve water quality via land use practices. This was created through an act that dictates that each jurisdiction must create a map depicting the district. It's also worth mentioning that as it relates to our current methodology centered around housing, the CBPA seems to have little impact on the map itself. Something else unique to Virginia is that it has 38 independent cities. This is fairly unique in terms of government. Most states have either cities or counties, but not both in one. Now that we understand the basics of how the atlas is populated with zoning data, we're now going to walk through how to use the interactive map and get the most out of its features. To follow along with me, you should head to zoningatlas.org/atlas. You can use a computer or mobile phone, but just know that the size of the map will be different for both. While you get set up, I'll share again the view of the map at the national scale. Here, for convenience sake, we've included Alaska and Hawaii on our slide. The colored in areas indicate our total of progress. You can see that we have 14 states, most recently Utah and California, plus DC completely integrated into the atlas. Many metro areas are completed, including several in Texas, Tennessee, North Carolina, and New York State. These published areas add up to over 8,600 jurisdictions. About 2/3 of these jurisdictions are confirmed to have zoning, and we have confirmed that the remaining third do not have zoning. Within zone jurisdictions, we've analyzed and published over 96,000 zoning districts, and our analysts have read over 1 million pages of zoning codes. We've completed analysis of land where more than half of Americans live, and we've covered more than half of the total land area of the United States. The places that we've published so far are home to about 52% of the nation's residents and cover about 53% of its total land. Now let's take a dive into the interactive map. The map opens at the national scale where the legend reflects the zone status of the jurisdiction to be analyzed and integrated into the NZA. If you have the tribal land and protected land layers on, you'll also see these in green and green-brown layers. This is most visible in the western states. In the Legend and Layers option box in the upper left corner, you have a few options to toggle on and off additional layers and features. You can also change the base map here. Now we'll use the Zoom and Filter box to explore a chosen geography. When we selected Virginia in the state dropdown, the map zoomed to the state. We have the option to be even more specific with our geography section. We selected Richmond in the metro micropolitan area dropdown. Then we selected Richmond City in the county dropdown and Richmond in the jurisdiction dropdown. And remember that Richmond is an independent city, which we mentioned earlier is somewhat unique to Virginia. The map zoomed to the city of Richmond and outlined the jurisdiction in black. Please note that you can only select one jurisdiction at a time. At this scale, notice that the legend updates to zoning district type. Light purple areas indicate primarily residential districts, meaning these districts are primarily zoned for residential uses. Dark purple areas indicate mixed with residential districts, meaning these districts allow a mix of residential and non-residential uses. Tan areas indicate non-residential districts, meaning residential as a primary use is prohibited. These are typically zones allowing industrial uses or other non-residential uses like airports or open space. Now let's apply filters to the map. The Show Me Where People Can Build box has options for quick filtering, like to show where missing middle housing or apartments are allowed. We toggled on the single family homes filter and you can see the map lost some color. Areas remain colored in when criteria satisfies the selected filters. In other words, this means that you can build single-family home anywhere that the map is light or dark purple. In the lower right corner, the filtering results box calculates the zoned acres and number of districts that satisfy the filtering criteria. According to these results, 71% of zoned acres in Richmond, or 31% of zoning districts, allow single-family housing by right. Note that the filtering results only show and are applied to the calculations for single selected jurisdictions, not anything else around it. Going back to the Show Me Where People Can Build box at the top left corner, we toggled where apartments with 4 or more units can be built, and you can see the change in locations that meet the criteria. And according to the filtering box, you can see that the percentages drop. 18% of zoned acres and 37% of Richmond's zoning districts meet the criteria for allowing apartments with 4 or more units. Now let's look at the advanced filters box. You should use it for selecting more specific criteria, like whether 1, 2, 3, or 4 or more family housing is also subject to a public hearing, minimum parking requirements, or height caps, among many other options. We've selected criteria where single-family housing is allowed as a right and a minimum lot size of 10,000 square feet. According to the filtering results, 30% of zoned acres in Richmond satisfy this criteria. So now you've learned a bit about the map, let's see how Virginia zones. I'll start with some statewide numbers, just to give you a sense of how all the different zoning codes come together across Virginia. There are 321 total jurisdictions in the Commonwealth. These include towns, cities, and in some cases, counties. In all jurisdictions with zoning, we analyzed over 50,000 pages of zoning code and logged up to 200 data points for each of the 4,106 districts that make up the zoned land of Virginia. Each of these codes is an average of 172 pages long. This is a mostly standard code length in terms of what we've seen across the country. Like most other East Coast states, this screenshot from the atlas shows that most of Virginia land is zoned. 294 of its 321 jurisdictions have zoning, shown in purple, and 27 we confirm do not have zoning, shown in gray. Note that there are 36 jurisdictions that we believe have zoning, but do not make their codes available to the public. Despite our team's diligent efforts, these jurisdictions did not provide us with copies of their zoning text, map, or both. As a result, their regulations are not included in the following analysis. Now let's break down the share of land categories across Virginia. Most land, 71%, is subject to zoning. This area is home to 98% of the state's population. 11% is protected land, which includes portions of the Appalachian Trail, Blue Ridge Mountains, and Shenandoah National Park. The remaining 14% is unzoned land, most of which comprises the 27 jurisdictions that don't have zoning. Land devoted to rights-of-way is also included in this category. Of the 71% of land that is zoned, nearly all of it allows for residential development. Only 3% of zoned land allows for non-residential uses, such as industrial spaces, institutional uses, or other open spaces. This table shows the share of residential land designated for different types of housing. From left to right, there are columns for 1, 2, 3, and 4 or more family housing. The darker blue shows that housing is allowed by right, the lighter blue requires a public hearing, and gray is prohibited. 98% of land allowing residential development allows 1 unit per lot by right. This means that single-family housing can be built almost anywhere in Virginia. Now compare this to the 2-family column and then the 4 or more family column. Apartments are only allowed to be built by right on 5% of Virginia's residential land. Another 16% allows them after public hearing, but those kinds of legal processes add costs, time, and uncertainties that can discourage development altogether. Notably, we learned that 1/5 of the Virginia jurisdictions with zoning do not allow any 4 or more family housing as a right. Now let's look at another key zoning characteristic. This donut chart shows the breakdown of minimum lot size requirements for single-family zoned land. The darker the green, the larger the required lot size. More than half of single-family land requires at least 40,000 square feet, which is roughly 1 acre. Within that, 1/3 requires 80,000 square feet or more, and that's comparable to the footprint of a large warehouse. Also notice that 28% of single-family land has varied lot size standards. This usually means a single zone allows several single-family housing types where each type is tied to a different minimum lot size. These minimums are considerably large and no doubt responsible for driving up housing costs, limiting who can live in an area, and encouraging sprawl. That said, they are smaller than a lot of the lot sizes we've seen in other states, such as Arizona, Colorado, and even Vermont. The NZA defines accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, as secondary homes located on the same lot as a primary residence. Across the country, ADUs are gaining popularity as a cheaper, more flexible alternative and are considered a meaningful way to expand housing options. This donut chart shows that permissions for building ADUs range widely. The darkest orange is the most permissive, lightest orange is the least permissive, and gray is prohibited. While you can build an ADU by right on 28% of single-family land, they're completely prohibited on 32%. And finally, we'll look at parking mandates. Parking is a costly use of valuable land and an important regulation to track because those extra costs can end up deterring new housing. In Virginia, 93% of residential lands have rules requiring off-street parking. These regulations apply across our 1, 2, 3, and 4 or more family housing treatments. 19 jurisdictions, however, do not have any parking requirements. These include Charlottesville, Roanoke, and Richmond. And now I'll pass it back to Ashley.
Thank you, Patrick. We'll now show or look at an analysis of some key regions within the Commonwealth. We'll start with Northern Virginia, a key economic driver and home to 1/3 of the state's population. So let's take a look at some of Virginia's most populous jurisdictions, including Alexandria, Arlington County, Fairfax County, and Loudoun County. Here's a visualization of single-family units allowed in each jurisdiction compared to their 4 or more family allowances. As mentioned before, the dark blue shows where the housing type is allowed. The light blue shows where the housing type requires a public hearing, and the gray shows where it is prohibited. So while it is typical that all 4 jurisdictions allow for plenty of single-family housing, Fairfax and Loudoun County allow for far less 4 or more family housing compared to Alexandria and Arlington County. This shows that Alexandria and Arlington County, which are closer to Washington, D.C., have adopted more permissive zoning frameworks with a greater mix of housing types, while Fairfax and Loudoun County, which are further away from D.C. and much bigger in land area, retain more characteristically suburban and therefore exclusionary zoning codes. Here we see a chart that illustrates the diversity of ADU permissions across jurisdictions. The darker the orange, the more permissive the jurisdiction, whereas gray shows where ADUs are prohibited. Although Loudoun County prohibits apartments on 89% of its residential land, it is more permissive to ADUs, allowing them without occupancy restrictions on all of its single-family land. The remaining jurisdictions saddle many of their ADU allowances with extra requirements like requiring a public hearing and imposing occupancy restrictions. Let's now take a look at 5 of the state's principal cities compared to their suburbs. These cities are defined by the census as the largest incorporated places within their metropolitan areas. The following charts show the principal city on the left and the information about their surrounding suburbs on the right. The amount of blue on these charts should now look fairly familiar. Nearly all land in both the urban centers and their suburbs allow for single-family housing. And here we see 4 family allowances that tell a different story. With the exception of Charlottesville and Roanoke, most land in these cities prohibits apartments. In the suburbs, these prohibitions are even more extreme, where hardly any land allow apartments by right. Where it is allowed, it is almost always dependent on discretionary public hearings. Single-family minimum lot sizes show another stark difference or contrast between the cities and suburbs. As you can see by the lighter shades of green on the left, most lot sizes in cities are under 10,000 square feet, which means they're fairly small. In the suburbs, the dark shades of green are larger lot sizes and balloon to approximately 40,000 square feet or more, which is much bigger and closer to an acre. These findings underscore how minimum lot sizes can contribute to exclusionary development along the city and suburban divide. So finally, let's take a look at how these places treat ADUs on single-family land. On a whole, we can see an inconsistency among regional approaches in ADUs. Lynchburg and Richmond are most permissive among the cities, and suburban Lynchburg is most permissive among the suburbs. The remaining array of restrictions suggests that there is no readily apparent relationship between ADUs and other zoning rules or housing allowances. And I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Great, thank you so much. So we've gotten some great questions in the chat so far, one of which is, I can't keep up with all of this information. How can I take notes quicker? Are we going to publish this webinar? So yes, it will be available on our website if you go to zoningatlas.org/Virginia, probably as soon as today. But for those of you who want to create some of the charts that you just saw from Ashley and Patrick yourselves, I encourage you to also check out this site, zoningatlas.org/snapshots. So for us, a snapshot is really a visual summary of information about housing allowances, accessory dwellings, minimum lot sizes, parking mandates. And on the next slide, we've provided a couple of examples, Fairfax, Virginia, and Fairfax County, Virginia. So on the left, you see some of the images that will appear when you go to that snapshots website and you select Fairfax, which is an individual jurisdiction. By the way, it has 324 pages of zoning codes. That's a pretty hefty code. But then you look on the right, Fairfax County, Virginia includes 4 jurisdictions. That means in addition to Fairfax, there are 3 others in the mix on the right, and you can compare and contrast figures, and you can generate your own zoning snapshots. So in addition to having the webinar available after we're finished with it, of course, the report itself, you too can sift through some of these facts and figures in your spare time by using our snapshots feature. So thanks for that great question, and thanks for the many questions that are already in the chat, which we'll get to in just a couple of minutes. But first, I wanted to close out by talking about how folks in Virginia can use the National Zoning Atlas. And I want to highlight just a few things. I think Virginia right now is having a pretty big moment in terms of housing and affordability related conversations. So you just came off the heels of statewide election. Both of the candidates talked about housing issues at the gubernatorial level. Now you have a governor-elect and a number of other new elected officials. I think now's the time to have these conversations, and I'm really excited to see where HousingForward and other housing advocacy groups take it. So with that in mind, strike while the iron is hot, we included some recommendations in our report. It's a lot of text on this page. I encourage you to check out the very last section in our report. But we think that lawmakers, policymakers should consider at a state level, of course, as well at the local level, but at a state level, things like allowing accessory dwelling units by right. A number of other states have done this, and it's been pretty successful, both for property owners and for communities and for people who need new housing. Now, it's a small gesture, but it's an important one. And we've certainly seen in California that accessory dwelling units have started to make up a pretty good slice of the new housing construction numbers. We think lot size restrictions are pretty large in Virginia, and you heard from both Patrick and Ashley how they work not only statewide but in within specific regions. Trying to reduce those lot size restrictions is something that we think lawmakers should consider. Third, we talk about multifamily options. So the numbers that we've assembled in the Virginia Zoning Atlas show that just 5% of land in the state allows for multifamily housing to be produced by right. That's a pretty low number. If you set out rules through zoning codes that would enable multifamily housing to be built, you'll probably see more multifamily housing, which we all know is some of the most affordable and accessible types of housing for people, families and households across the Commonwealth. Similarly, streamlining approvals. So you saw big numbers in some jurisdictions for public hearing requirements. Again, laying out clearly in the zoning code how multifamily housing can be built is something that other states and many local jurisdictions have done, and is something that we think that the state should consider as well. Lifting accessory dwelling unit occupancy rules, so not only allowing them to be created by property owners in the first place, but also lifting those requirements that owners live there, or that ban renters, or that require employees, or in some zoning codes, quote, domestic servants. Those kinds of things are pretty outdated, and they make an ADU less usable for the market as a whole. So lifting occupancy rules through legislation is a good idea. Patrick mentioned, or Ashley mentioned in the beginning, the fact that 36 zoning codes are missing. So we know from internet searches and from meeting minutes that it's likely that 36 Virginia zoning jurisdictions have some form of zoning, but we were not able, despite our really diligent efforts and our professional team that does this day in and day out, to get those codes. They're all listed in the report, somewhere in the appendix. We encourage you, if you are in one of these jurisdictions and you have access to the codes, to send it along so we can include it in the map. But generally, people should have access to zoning codes. We're obviously really big on providing access and information to people. That's something that could be considered too at the statewide level. And then finally, reducing or eliminating parking mandates. There have been a number of jurisdictions within Virginia, including large ones, that have eliminated parking mandates. It's probably time to consider that as a whole. as Patrick pointed out, these are pretty costly additions to the cost of housing. So these are just a few things that the numbers suggest Virginia might need to consider in order to bring it in line with some of the states that are really making progress on housing production through zoning reform. As Eric said at the beginning, even we recognize that zoning is not the end all be all. There's so many factors that go into whether housing is created and whether it's affordable, but zoning is key. Without zoning reform, you can't actually build the housing in the first place. So with that in mind, I'm just going to turn to a few other things that we have done in other states to give you an idea about how we can take this data further. One is through informing legislation. Last session for the Texas legislature, we developed an analysis using our data for Texas on manufactured housing as to how many communities a proposed bill would affect. We called it a zoning impact analysis. It was the first time that we did this. And in fact, we were able to inform the Manufactured Housing Association, legislators, local officials, whether we thought the jurisdiction would be affected by the bill, what they would have to do in order to comply. The bill passed, probably in the coming years, meaning that more manufactured housing will be built in Texas. Whatever Virginia considers, we have a lot of great data and we can conduct these kinds of analyses. Second, we've looked in other states at the links between zoning and affordability, racial and economic demographics, and more. I want to point you to this report that we did after the first zoning atlas in Connecticut was completed, co-authored by the Urban Institute, Yona Freemark and Lydia Lowe. It's called Bringing Zoning into Focus. And it revealed that exclusionary zoning correlates with higher homeownership rates, less racial diversity, higher income levels, and so on. Maybe what you would expect, but now we have the numbers to prove it. And then finally, Virginia is a coastal state. There are many communities in Virginia that are feeling the impacts of sea level rise, of climate change, whatever you call it. The weather is changing and our communities have to respond. We've done analysis on sea level rise and zoned capacity for residential development with the Regional Plan Association in the New York City region. And I think Virginia is ripe for that kind of analysis, because where you zone is where people have to live and work. And if you're zoning in places that are subject to sea level rise, that's probably a bad idea. So thinking about zoning strategies, especially for those communities along the coast, but including also those communities subject to inland flooding, is a next step potentially for our data. So with those little ideas in mind, I'm going to turn it over to, again, two of our excellent partners. I'm starting with Chris Thompson, the Director of Strategic Housing for Virginia Housing, and then closing out with Jonathan Knopf, who, along with Eric, serves in the leadership of HousingForward. He is the Executive Director for Programs. So I'm going to mute myself for a bit and I'll come back on after they've both made their comments. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Just want to make a few comments. So on behalf of Virginia Housing, I would like to say how excited we are to support the development of the Virginia Zoning Atlas. I can say from our rental, home ownership, policy, community outreach divisions, really throughout our entire organization, we've been following the development of the Zoning Atlas and look forward to using this to help us become better informed about land use across Virginia. I would also like to congratulate HousingForward Virginia for getting us to this day. We've been longtime partners with HousingForward Virginia, and they are such a tremendous resource and leader in terms of housing, education, and policy in the Commonwealth. And the Zoning Atlas would not have been completed without their leadership. So I can say, as the State Housing Finance Agency, we are regularly engaged in discussions with localities, developers, policymakers, and more around land use and zoning and the impact of this on housing development. We've long supported efforts to help partners better understand local and regional housing markets, undertake zoning ordinance analyses, identify obstacles to development, and I can say this first of its kind, coordinated statewide initiative is going to be a valuable resource to help continue those discussions and inform future policy discussions. So we have already started to promote this to our partners, and we look forward to future community-based meetings to help everyone really unlock the power of the Zoning Atlas and use this to drive more meaningful conversation and action around land use in Virginia. So let me just close by again saying thank you to Housing Forward Virginia, as well as the team from the National Zoning Atlas for bringing us this great new resource. Now turn it over to Jonathan.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Sarah, and your whole team for getting us to where we are here today. Yeah, I'm really grateful and just very impressed at everything that's been done to create the zoning atlas for Virginia and see it in the context of the progress that's being made across the nation. So just a few things that I hope are worth mentioning before we move into Q&A. So our goals at Housing Forward Virginia are, have from the start been directly aligned with those of the National Zoning Atlas and the broader movement to democratize and demystify zoning. Because a core part of our mission is to unlock and draw insights from information that is usually hidden behind complex legal jargon or tedious data sets. It's really a blessing and a curse that we're the type of people that enjoy doing that kind of work and showing that off to other people who actually have decision-making power or who run programs or who have influence over a community so that they understand these complex issues and complex problems in the same way that we're able to. And because we do this, since we believe that communities can make smarter decisions if they have a greater and stronger knowledge of how the laws and the policies and attitudes that have shaped the space around them and their communities matter and what we can do to change them for the better. So a few key points that I want to emphasize. I think first that anybody who is in the know, so anybody who has been following the zoning conversation, either here in Virginia or nationally, or who works in housing or affordable housing, these findings are not a surprise and they are not groundbreaking. They are reinforcing for what you already know. But these facts at the scale that we now have them, the fact that we have them for the whole state and we can piece it all together, it serves as a common foundation for policymakers, practitioners, advocates, and everybody else in this space. And so we can use these facts and this foundation now to follow the successes that we've seen in other states like Texas, that Sarah just talked about, in Montana, and other places where empirical knowledge and understanding of the impact that zoning has around housing opportunity and housing supply is a critical way to drive the change that we need to see. Second, that these findings reinforce a couple of major challenges that we can't ignore. One is that things like those large lot size minimums and other similar regulations are one of the major things preventing smaller, more affordable home ownership opportunities throughout the state. And since anybody who is familiar with the genesis of zoning in Virginia and in many other places across the country, it was used as a tool to segregate our communities. And unfortunately, we still have this hangover of these restrictive policies and preventing these more affordable, more accessible homeownership opportunities only perpetuates the racial wealth gap that remains so significant in Virginia and throughout the United States. But also on the rental side, that limited zoning for apartments, first of all, is a major supply constraint for the larger multifamily development that is needed to mitigate demand and to at least slow the acceleration of rent growth in places like Northern Virginia and now down throughout the Urban Crescent and the Richmond metro region and Hampton Roads. But we've also, through zoning, almost completely eliminated for the past few generations the ability to build anything between a single family home and larger multifamily. So we need to change our zoning rules to allow for that missing middle, but also do so that in a way that we're teaching developers and recruiting new developers to build duplexes and triplexes and quads and things that create some of the most attractive and most valuable neighborhoods in a lot of the cities throughout Virginia. So we have a lot of opportunities to change zoning and make it work for what we need it to do moving forward. And then finally, I think these findings highlight what we can expect if we do nothing, right? So there are lots of communities in Virginia that are making very impressive and laudable progress on reforming their zoning and making it work to allow for the scale and types of housing that are needed to meet the needs of their community and their constituents. But research shows that while changing zoning to allow more housing, it can have many varied effects. Generally, it at least helps make things not worse. The effects on rents and home prices depend on the scale of how you measure that, whether it's across the region or within a particular neighborhood. And researchers are still trying to suss out exactly how all these changes over the past 5 years or so across the country are influencing housing prices. But the one thing that research is 100% clear about is that if we do nothing and continue a regimen of restrictive zoning rules and regulations, that housing prices will continue to rise significantly, and we will lose opportunities for ourselves and for our future generations. So we need to take action, and it's incumbent upon localities and the state to help make that happen. And I think this information serves as a terrific foundation for having those conversations. So to wrap up at least my piece, a couple things about what you can expect from us moving forward on the zoning atlas and our work around zoning in general. First and foremost, we have our state housing conference next week, the Virginia Governor's Housing Conference. I'm sure many of you on the call will be there. We have two big things happening that Wednesday on the first day of the conference. The opening plenary is called Rezoning for Abundance. We're bringing in Eric Kronberg, who is an architect and is known as the zoning whisperer, to talk to us and attendees about how we can use zoning holistically to create the communities that we know we need to see. And then we also have Sarah joining us for the keynote plenary to open up the conference, which we're very excited about, where she'll talk to the group assembled for the conference about the findings for the Virginia Zoning Atlas. Second, moving into next year, we will have a major initiative called Zoned Out, where we will be bringing presentations like this and other engagement opportunities directly to communities and audiences across Virginia. These will be both virtual and in person, and we're developing that content today, and we'll be doing that into early next year. So you can expect a interest form if you are part of our mailing list and sign up to receive our updates. You can sign up to let us know if you're interested in us coming to your community or speaking to your group about zoning in 2026. So we're grateful for support from Virginia Housing to allow us to do that. And then finally, there will be a brief survey that you'll be prompted to take after this webinar. Please take 2 seconds of your time to fill that out. It helps us continue to receive funding and advance this work moving forward. So finally, just want to say thank you again to the National Zoning Atlas team, Chris and his colleagues at Virginia Housing for supporting Housing Forward, and our funders at Capital One. None of this would have been possible without all of you, as well as folks on the call who are supporting us and driving us to continue making zoning a priority as part of this work. So with that, I will turn it back over to the NZA team to roll us into Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan. And we have so many questions in the chat. So you actually addressed one of them, which is how will this report be used in advocacy going forward? So I'm going to check that one off our list. Thank you for covering that. And there's so much exciting things ahead. So just to conclude our part, this report really is just the beginning. We do want to keep going with analysis of zoning conditions in Virginia. And as Jonathan said, I will be at the Virginia Governor's Housing Conference in a week. So really excited to continue this conversation. I'll present a bit about this. There's some of this that you heard today, but I'll add a little bit more, maybe opinions as well. Just this slide we always include at the end so you can connect with us. You obviously found the webinar, but we have various forms of social media. We've already gotten an email, by the way, asking for a modest correction to a recent jurisdiction boundary update. So thank you for that email. We love to get your feedback, and we definitely love to make updates. So with that, I'm going to do a rapid fire Q&A for our analyst team and try to get as many of these in as possible. And I'm going to start with Ashley. So we got a question in about how on earth a jurisdiction can decide that it's just not sharing its zoning code. And of course, the answer to that is that they really can't. Laws are public documents. And so, we do have to go through a process for trying to find them, and they really should make them publicly available. But Ashley, what are some strategies that you've used to find zoning codes?
So a lot of times, if it's not readily available on the internet, I might try to call a jurisdiction or send an email to try and prompt someone to send it at the earliest convenience along with the map. I think it's always, or sometimes it's beneficial to explain the reason or your interest in these documents. And then sometimes it's a little bit easier and that isn't required. But that's usually the approach I take when I'm looking for these documents.
We've also had in some geographies, and we're working in West Virginia right now, where there are a lot of jurisdictions that don't have zoning, a lot of smaller jurisdictions. We've seen people reach out via Facebook to local city council leaders, and just all kinds of strategies to try to get these documents. We can get pretty creative, and sometimes we just come up short. So again, if you're out there from those places, give us a note, give us a code. We'd love it. I'm going to ask a map question for Patrick. So there were a couple questions about transit stations and whether they're included on the map. So could you weigh in on what we do include in terms of transit stations and let folks know how they can find it on the map itself?
Yes, we do include transit stations. There's a layer that you can see on the Legends and Layer Options section on the top left. And next to the transit stations, there's a little icon that will detail exactly what's included, our sourcing. But since you can't see my screen, I'll just tell you, it really includes a gamut of transit stations, including subways, elevateds, commuter railroads, streetcars, bus rapid transit, cable cars, among many other things. And the data itself comes from Transit Explorer, which is a data set that's updated relatively frequently and is also sourced from the U.S. Department of Transportation. And you can see it as white dots on the map. Each of those is a transit station. And if you highlight over it, it'll tell you the name of the transit station and what type of transit is represented.
So that's a great layer, and we focus on fixed transit stations because the relationship between a fixed node as opposed to, let's say, a bus stop that might change, the relationship between a fixed transit station and development and land use development is maybe clearer. And we know a lot of states, including Massachusetts and California, are mostly focused on the fixed transit stations when they're engaging in land use policy at that level. There was also a question about how we could do, whether we could do analysis of build out scenarios around transit stations. And the answer is yes, because in addition to the information we discussed here, we collect height caps, lot coverage requirements, FAR mandates, minimum unit size requirements, setbacks. So we actually could build out in 3D the buildings that can be built for housing, in particular around transit stations. That's something that we're considering doing in a couple of other places. So if it becomes a live issue in Virginia, we certainly have the information to do it. I'll take this question, which is, how are the suburban areas defined? There was a specific question as to whether Norfolk was included in the Virginia Beach area. And for that particular question, the area defined by the census. So that's how we define these regions, principal cities and their suburbs. We use the census based statistical areas and the definitions for those. In the case of Virginia Beach, it's actually Virginia Beach - Chesapeake - Norfolk. So those are the three cities that are highlighted by the census in their defined area. So yes, Norfolk is included as part of that area. I'm going to go to Ashley now, because there are several questions about accessory dwelling units, and you have logged tens of thousands of zoning code pages at this point. What did you see specifically in Virginia? Was there any rhyme or reason as to what kinds of places were allowing ADUs, what you saw in the ADU sections of the zoning codes? Just your thoughts about what you've seen, I think, would be relevant to those who had questions about ADUs.
So I do remember, and this is mentioned briefly in the report, that a lot of the ADUs were either called accessory apartments, granny flats, or in-law suites. And my assumption for naming them this or these titles would be to accommodate for a section of society or the population that probably can't afford, maybe, to maintain or keep or purchase a single family home at the sizes that they are currently. So that speaks to the exclusionary housing. I think there's an effort to include certain sections of society. And if we look further in the report, they also talk about a lot of people being renters. So the introduction of ADUs could also assist in lower rent prices. And I think it could, depending on your train of thought, it could be useful in that area.
Thank you. There's a quick map question, and I'll toss that over to Patrick. So what's included in the protected lands layer? National parks, national forests, state parks? What do we got?
Yes, all of the above and then some. It also includes local parks as well. So that basically covers it: federal, local, and state parks.
And that comes from a national source as well, doesn't it? So we try to get our layers that are on the website from national sources.
That's right. Our tribal land sources, PADIS, which is the protected lands, and then water are all national based. PADIS doesn't typically change very much. I haven't really noticed. Water does, because certain wetlands will become developed. So we have to kind of keep a closer eye on water, but PADIS not as much.
And so for PADIS, it's the Protected Areas Database of the US, right? I think that's what that refers to, the acronym. You're right, it doesn't seem to have changed too much from year to year. And what we do with that layer is we actually cut out the underlying zoning from that layer, because it's assumed that those areas don't have zoning except in the individual private parcels, and that has gotten to be pretty complicated in some cases, like Cape Cod. We have just a couple minutes, and maybe I'll just ask myself the last question, which is, a lot of people have mentioned in the chat jurisdictions that are considering zoning. So we had a few comments about Richmond undergoing a zoning review. And we all recognize, and we've acknowledged in the report, that some of the jurisdictions that we've identified have gone through recent changes, including Alexandria, Arlington, Charlottesville, and some are still being worked out in the court system. So as these changes happen, especially in the major cities, how will the map be updated? So currently, we just finished our Virginia statewide, so we're pretty excited about that. Our plan is to take some of these bigger updates, and as big cities update their maps, usually we catch wind of it. We work with a lot of different groups at the local level, and usually somebody will say, all right, this one is done. We'll update it just using our own resources and time. To do a full statewide update, that might be something that comes up in the queue in a year or so. Well, we would want to go town by town and look back at everything. We have in the past relied on philanthropic funding for that, although we're trying to think of different ways to actually make that more mechanical and make that happen. And also to provide a portal for planners to help to upload their own information so that we can keep it updated in real time. So we're working on that. We appreciate the question, and we realize that we have the benefit of helping to inform advocacy, which then, as I said before, changes the map, which means that our work is never done. So once again, we thank you for joining us for this point in time webinar. We thank you for supporting this work, and especially to our partners and sponsors. Thanks again, and we'll continue this conversation. I'll see some of you in Roanoke in just a week, and look forward to that. Thanks, everyone.